These times are strange, it's quite surreal. It's never been like this. Remembering the good old days when we could hug and kiss. We'd pack the gyms and restaurants and move through public settings. We'd give high fives and drink at dives, hold hands and dance at weddings. Now the days are longer, yet the darker in the way. We're pressing pause on normalcy, just going day by day. But we can still make jokes and art, garden, dance and sing. Cook, read books, try on fun looks and learn about new things. We can talk with friends of ours and have a heart to heart, just so long as we all stay 6 feet apart, 6 feet apart. It's the newest thing to do. Stay 6 feet apart, 6 feet apart. The distance between me and you, 6 feet apart, 6 feet apart. And when I say I'll keep you very close to my heart, it's purely metaphorical. These times are quite historical, so step aside, let's live our lives 6 feet apart. These times are strange, it's quite surreal. It's never been like this. Remembering the...
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to 6 Feet Apart Productions presents Sunday Night Stories Special. Regina Stoops and I at 6 Feet Apart Productions are really thrilled and honoured that two of the finest storytellers around are coming on our show to tell stories. This week it's a special because we're taking a break from our normal lineup of short, true personal stories to bring you some slightly longer ones. And they might be true and they might not be true. You get to decide. At this point, I'd like to give a little bit of a shout out to Dave and Juliet Picorni, who run West Side Stories in Petaluma. They introduced me to both Brandon and Bill at their Wine Country Spoken Word Festival. And I'm forever grateful for opening my eyes to this huge, enormous, fabulous world of storytelling. Now, we're not charging for this Sunday Night Stories. So what we'd like to do is ask for donations to three causes that are quite close to us. So Feeding America, the World Health Organization, and National Storytelling Network. Now, I've put their links in the description below, and we'll have them on our Facebook page, and I'll put them other places. But if you feel that you enjoy the show and fancy giving a donation, then please consider one of those three charities. Now, before we start the show, what we'd like you to do is try and get some sort of theatre-like experience, because we're all at home, we're not all together. So maybe turn off your phones, draw your curtains, grab a drink and some snacks. We can't see you, if you want to loosen your clothing, we can't tell. Snuggle down and prepare to be entertained. We've also got the live chat on YouTube. So if you want to put some comments in the chat, every so often I'm going to have a look and I can call out any interesting or unusual comments. And where you're watching from even would be quite nice. Okay, so now onto our show. First up, we have an amazing Bay Area storyteller, Brandon Spars. He's been a college and high school teacher for about 20 years. He's an author of 3 books on storytelling. They're really good. So if you are interested in storytelling or want to get into storytelling or a teacher of some kind, then I really recommend you getting those. He's won multiple Grand Slams, and at the Moth and at West Side Stories, and he often talks about his travels to Indonesia and the West Pacific Islands. You can find out more about Brandon Spars by going to brandonspars.com. And again, his website is in our description on YouTube below, so you can go and see him and follow him there. Now, I feel whenever I watch Brandon, it's like watching an entire theatre performance in one person, a bit like a one-man band of storytelling. He's dramatic, commanding, imaginative, emotional, and utterly hysterical. And I recently found out something, that he also likes noodling. Now, it's not what I thought, which was sucking spaghetti up really fast through your mouth. Noodling, apparently, is when you like fishing, and this is what Brandon, he likes catching catfish with his bare hands. Who knew? So please give yourself a big round of applause and say welcome to Brandon Spars.
Hi, everyone. During this time of isolation, it made me think of a time 30 years ago when I was isolated. And ironically, this was a time when I stood out the most. I was living in Indonesia and teaching as a volunteer teacher at a college, and I was bigger than everyone around me. I was louder than everyone around me. I was clumsier, hairier, sweatier. In fact, on a bus, I overheard Indonesians talking about me, and they referred to me as a raksasa, which translates to ogre. Now, complicating things, this ogre fell in love. I remember seeing her in my college classroom. She was like a flower in a field of grass. She was like the jewel on the pendant of a necklace. Why, she was like the island of Bali itself, prize of the Malay archipelago. I was immediately heartbroken and dismayed. Why would a beautiful princess ever love a hideous ogre? But in a feat of optimism, I decided to write my feelings out in my broken Indonesian, and I gave her the note. And that had the end result of her stopping attendance to any of my classes. Now, after about a week of her absence, I had become heartbroken and hopeless. But in a feat of optimism for the second time, I wondered if maybe I hadn't expressed myself in my broken Indonesian. Maybe worse, I had said something insulting. And so I decided to go pay this young woman, Irma Wati, a visit at her family home. As a pretext, I brought with me a copy of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. My arrival at her family's compound was like setting a bomb off. The father was enjoying the afternoon breeze with no shirt, reading his newspaper beneath a mango tree. And when he saw me, he bolted up and ran inside, presumably to get dressed. The mother came out of the house, wiping her hands on a dish towel, surveying the situation. She marched back into the kitchen, and something hit hot oil with a hiss as she began to fry up snacks for my visit. A pair of younger siblings ushered me into the visiting room, whereupon Irma Wati was produced, interrupted from her afternoon nap, wearing very short shorts with incredibly messy hair. I have never seen her look so beautiful. The father arrived in a buttoned shirt, and soon after the mother came with a heap of fresh fried snacks, and there was a moment of silent tension, which broke when I pulled out my copy of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet and informed them the college was having a school play, and I wanted Irma Wati to play the lead part. Oh, the father was pleased. He pumped my hand and he told me he hoped his daughter would do a good job. And then he stripped off his shirt and marched back out beneath the mango tree to enjoy his afternoon newspaper. The mother hovered for a few moments, long enough for the sixth member of the family to show up. It was an incredibly skinny cat. I remember bending down and petting the thing, and it was like electricity, like it had never been petted before. It looked like it was on the brink of starvation. And when I was about to feed one of the snacks to it, the mother took action. No, she said, and gripped the cat with a pair of tongs she still had in her hands. She dragged it off like an unwanted branch that had fallen in the yard. For the first time, I was alone with Irma Wati. I asked her, did she want to do the play? She was silent. I asked her about my letter. I rephrased some of the things I had said. I couldn't eat because of her. I didn't want to talk to anybody because of her. I couldn't sleep because of her. But she was completely silent. Dismay and heartbreak began to wash over me. But then, in a third and final feat of optimism, I stood up, causing Irma Wati to start. The father had seemed like a congenial man, and I decided to go out to the garden and chat with him. Maybe, if I could win him over to my side, I stood a chance with her. Against his protests, I sat down right next to him in the dirt, and I began to speak in my broken Indonesian. I told him that Irma Wati's doing the play would help her prospects at the college, why it would help her prospects beyond college, getting a job. I started out strong, but then I faltered. And then I made a mistake that most learners of Indonesian will make at least once in their career as speakers. I was trying to say my embarrassment was great that I couldn't speak Indonesian, but what I said, in fact, was, I have enormous genitals. And when the father said no, I said, oh, yes, I do. I have very large genitals. I had just finished telling him that it was difficult to live in Indonesia with such large genitals when the beautiful Irmawati arrived with the tray of snacks. Having heard what I said, her eyes grew wide, whereupon I said, maybe your daughter can help me with that problem, with my large genitals. She spun around, headed back to the house without saying a word. For a moment, the father was completely silent. Then he began to speak. Now, I've had a hard time understanding him right up to the day he passed away. And I realized later it's because he switches languages from Indonesian to Javanese to Balinese. So I was hopelessly lost when he began to speak. Something about the mango tree and the neighbor and a motorcycle helmet. And I began constructing all kinds of narratives. Had the neighbor stolen the mangoes? Had the motorcycle helmet been stuck in the tree? I had no idea. The cat arrived, and somehow between its time getting dragged off and its arrival here, it had been covered with tar all over its haunches and leaves were stuck to it. I stopped trying to pay attention to the father, and looking at the cat made me think about my own situation. Poor Irmawati. She deserved someone who wasn't hairy and sweaty. She deserved someone who could speak Indonesian, who could sit in the guest room with her and make her laugh. Someone who could understand her father, who is now looking at me, stating, "Satu, dua, apa tiga? Satu, dua, apa tiga?" I think he was asking me something, and I would have to reveal that I hadn't understood a single word that he had said. But I never had to. I was saved by the cat. With its haunches still planted a respectable 4 feet from the snacks, it stretched its paw out and aimed them at the snacks and then poured itself through its paw like a fuzzy striped amoeba. It was just about to grasp onto one of those pieces of fried fishy goodness when doo-doo, the father was on his feet. He's a very powerful man, and when he moves, his muscles pump up and down his legs like dribbling basketballs. He covered the distance in a fraction of a second, and was the sound of the swoop of his mighty leg, and then pop as he kicked the cat straight up into the tree. There was the sound of tearing leaves, and then a plume of foliage shot through the upper canopy as the cat flew through the tree and completely out of the garden. He kicked the poor thing out of the garden. Well, I took this as my chance to make an exit. Thank you, sorry, I said. And the next thing I knew, I was pushing my bicycle down the dirt alley away from their house. I hadn't thanked the mother. I hadn't said goodbye to Irmawati. No more feats of optimism. I realized it probably didn't matter because this was the last time I'd ever be coming to this house. Then I stopped. There, in the middle of the dirt road, was a little gray lump. It was the cat. A little bit of blood was trickling from its nose. It was trembling. I bent down and marveled at how far it had flown. Lest it should have survived this kick only to be run over by a car, I looked for a place to set it where it would be safe, and finding none, I decided to creep back to the garden, and I slid it carefully right through the gate. I put my hand on the cat. It was still shivering. It had been my comrade in the struggle to win the support and love of this family. We had both failed. When I looked up, I froze. There, framed in the window, in all of her fierce beauty, was Irmawati. I held my hand up hesitantly and waved, and then I left. For 3 days, I didn't come out of my house. I didn't want to eat anything. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I couldn't sleep, yet I didn't leave my bed. And then on the third day, there was the roar of many motorcycles as they came right into the garden, right in front of the house I was renting. My heart skipped a beat when I realized it was Irmawati leading the pack. And in a commanding, confident tone, she began barking instructions in Indonesian, and all the students gathered around her. She handed out copies she had made of Romeo and Juliet. She assigned different parts. A rehearsal schedule was made. The show was happening. And then one by one, the students left until it was just Irmawati. She was sitting on my stoop, holding her backpack, and I sat next to her. "I'm so glad you're going to do the play," I said. She said. And then she handed me her backpack and skipped over to her motorcycle and started it. I was just about to ask why she had given me her backpack when it moved. And when I opened the backpack, out came the cat. It had lived. It had survived. Oh. When I looked at her, she said the first thing she's ever said to me in English. She'd been too shy to speak in class, too shy at her house. She said, "You two belong together." And for the next 6 years, indeed, we did belong together, that cat and I. But Irmawati and I also belonged together. She began staying later and later after practices. And then once, under the auspices of visiting her cat, she came to my house. And while we were bending over the cat, our hands touched. And we looked at each other, then stood up. And with the cat swishing between our legs, we kissed. A year later, we were engaged. Another year after that, we were married. And now here we are, 25 years later, in quarantine, but at least we're together. Just as it's my wish for all of you to be able to connect with the ones you love during this time of isolation. Thank you.
Good job. Thank you, Brandon. Although I don't think I'm ever going to get this side of your enormous genitals out of my head. But who doesn't love a cat lover? Anyway, we've had a few chats. Obviously, everyone was quite taken with your story. Somebody was particularly obsessed with the snacks. So at some point, you might have to tell us what the snacks were. We've got Alan from Kansas, and we've got Fleetus. I'm not sure I've said that right, from Baltimore. So who else is listening? We've got lots of people listening. So, tell us where you're from, anything interesting that you'd like us to hear. Lovely. So thank you, Brandon. That was really hysterical. Our main speaker tonight is someone I only heard about a couple of years ago, but he has probably been telling stories since he first started talking, I imagine. He's a nationally renowned, although maybe now internationally renowned, award-winning storyteller and author of 6 fabulous books. He's won so many awards, I think he needs a separate room in his house to store them all. He was awarded the National Storytelling Network Circle of Excellence Award and been featured 19 times at the National Storytelling Festival. My favourite of his awards is that his tall tales have made him the 5 times champion of the West Virginia Liars Contest, which gives you a little bit of a hint of what some of the stories that Bill tells. If you want to see more, and he's got CDs, he's got books, he's got all sorts of things. His books are amazing. Go to leppstorytelling.com, and that's Lepp with 2 Ps. Again, his website's down in the description below and on our Facebook page. Bill is called clever, versatile, magnificent, charming, and outrageous. A cross between Dr. Seuss and film noir. And again, my personal favourite, this is a comment. Bil Lepp is the wonder bra of storytelling. Isn't that marvellous? He takes something small and insignificant and pushes it up into something big and mightily interesting. And also what you might not know, well, not many people know about Bill, is that at high school, he was voted prom queen. It's now my huge honour and privilege to introduce to you Bil Lepp.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. I am five-time champion of the West Virginia Liars Contest. And in 2006, as a result of that and some other things, I was voted one of the 55 good things about West Virginia. Now, it turns out that the reason there's 55 is because there's 55 counties in the state of West Virginia. And then I was a little bit upset to realize that I was about halfway down the list. And then it occurred to me that the list was alphabetical, so I didn't feel so bad after that. But as a result of that, I got a phone call from the principal of the high school that I had graduated from, asking me if I would be the commencement speaker for the 2006 graduating class. And I thought to myself, finally, at last, someone has realized that what young people need the most is to hear my insightful words and lessons to guide them off into the world. And so certainly I agreed that I would be the commencement speaker. And then I hung up the phone and I immediately had two thoughts. The first one was, oh my goodness, it's been 18 years since I graduated from high school. I had dreams and aspirations. Perhaps I should get on top of some of those things. And the next thing I thought was, oh my goodness, it's been 18 years since I graduated from high school. There could be children in that graduating class who are the children of people I graduated with, because there were kids like that in my class. I wasn't one of them and didn't know any of them. And then I thought, I really want to say something momentous. And by the way, this story is dedicated to all the people who don't get to have a graduation this year. This is your commencement speech. I thought what I really want to say is something that is going to inspire, something that's going to move, something that's really going to get these kids to go out in life with a lot of enthusiasm. And so I thought what I should do is reflect on all of the commencement speeches that I have heard in my life. Now, I have graduated from one high school, one college, one major university, and I went to my sister's graduation. That's 4 commencement speakers. That's probably an hour and a half of my life. And I reflected on everything that all of those people had said. And I can only remember, it turns out, one thing that any of them had said. And that was Chuck Yeager, who spoke at my sister's graduation. Of course, Chuck Yeager is the first person to break the speed of sound. He said that if you dive too steeply in a jet, the wings will come off, which is useful information, but I have not yet had the opportunity to apply that information. So then I decided to myself, instead of that, what I want to do is instead of saying something inspiring, I just want to, when these kids look back 18 years after their graduation, I want them to at least remember just one thing that I said in my commencement speech. So I wrote my speech. The day arrived. I went to the place where the graduation was, and it was in a pavilion in the county fairgrounds, because the county that I graduated high school from only had one high school. It's not a very big county. And the gym at the high school wasn't big enough to house everyone for the commencement ceremony. So we were in a pavilion at the county fairgrounds. And because it was the only high school in the entire county, they couldn't farm all of the dignitaries out to other graduations. So all of the important people in the county were on stage at this commencement. There was the police chief from both the towns in the county, and the fire chiefs, and the school superintendent, and the mayors. About 17 dignitaries were on stage, and all of them were going to speak. And so the ceremony started, and I was sitting there in my chair listening to this drone on. And finally, the principal got up, and by this time, people were getting kind of rowdy. And he got up and he said, just before he introduced me, he said to the audience, he said, eyes on me. And I thought to myself, children, this man no longer has any power over you whatsoever. This is just a ceremony. It's just pomp and circumstance. It means nothing. You don't even have to be here. You've still graduated. But I was a little scared of the man, so I didn't say anything. And then he introduced me, and I got up to the podium, and I was looking out at the audience, and there in the middle was the 300 or so graduating seniors, and then all around them in a big U were the 1,200 just pleased mothers and fathers and grandmothers and grandfathers. They were so proud and excited, and then mingled in with them were a lot of disgruntled younger siblings who were forced to come to this event. And then standing sort of outside, leaned against the pillars around the pavilion, were several people in cut off or like AC/DC t-shirts with the sleeves cut off, and they were wearing cut off blue jeans, and they were smoking cigarettes and dipping snuff all at the same time. And I'm not exactly sure what they were doing there, except maybe they were sitting on their couch in their houses, and one of them was like, "What are we going to do tonight?" And the other was like, "I don't know. I heard they're having commencement out at the fairgrounds. I ain't never been to a commencement before." So they decided to come. And so I got up to the podium, and there I was, looking at the audience, waiting to make my impression. And I started my commencement speech. And I said that when I moved to Philippi, West Virginia, I had come from Germany via Dayton, Ohio. When I was a sophomore in high school, I applied to be an exchange student to Germany. And so my junior year, I went to Germany from Dayton, Ohio. And I remember quite clearly standing on the tarmac at the Dayton International Airport. And my father said to me, because this was a long time ago and you could go on the tarmac, my father said to me, "While you are gone in Germany for a year, we are going to move, and we're not going to tell you where." And I thought, isn't that funny? And then about, 6 months into my stay in Germany, clearly this was way before the internet and cell phones, I made one of my infrequent phone calls home, and I got the old "do-do-do, I'm sorry, the number you have dialed has been disconnected." And about 3 weeks after that, I got a letter from my parents explaining that they had moved to Philippi, West Virginia. So I went from Dayton, Ohio to Germany to Philippi, West Virginia. Now, at that time, the population of Dayton, Ohio was about 170,000 people. The population of Barber County, West Virginia was 17,000 people. So the county had a 10% population of the city. And at that time, there was one stoplight in the entire county and 2 fast food restaurants. There was a Hardee's and a Kentucky Fried Chicken. Now, when I had been in Germany, I was in the city of Cologne. I was standing in the shadow of the Cologne Cathedral, and I found the greatest postcard that I have ever come across. This, of course, was during the Cold War when China and the Soviet Union were still locked off. And this postcard said, "The prettiest place in Cologne is McDonald's. The prettiest place in Rome is McDonald's. The prettiest place in Paris is McDonald's. Beijing and Moscow don't have a prettiest place." And I thought that was so funny that I mailed it to all my friends back at home. And so I moved to Philippi, and I called my friends back in Dayton, and I said, "This county's so small. There's only one stoplight, and there's not even a McDonald's." And I could hear them sort of gasp. And I know what they were thinking. They were thinking only a godless communist would suffer to live in a place where there was no McDonald's. But I wanted a job. And I started to apply for jobs. But at that time, Barber County was probably one of the poorest counties in the United States of America. So it was difficult to find a job because even the jobs that are traditionally held by teenagers were held by full-grown adults who were trying to feed their families. So, grocery clerks and gas station attendants, paper boys. You can try and make paper boy politically correct, but if you say paper people, that's when you fold up a piece of paper, take a pair of scissors, paper people. And so anyway, and fast food workers, a lot of them were full-grown adults. But I applied to Kentucky Fried Chicken because, I wanted to work somewhere nice, not at Hardee's, unless, of course, Hardee's is a sponsor. And then, yay, Hardee's. And it took me about 8 months of consistently applying at Kentucky Fried Chicken to get a job. Not because I don't have the skill set necessary to work at a Kentucky Fried Chicken. But again, because most of the jobs in the county were held by full-grown adults. But I finally got the job at Kentucky Fried Chicken. And I have to tell you, even after all of these years, that it was one of the best jobs that I ever had in my life. I think everyone should have to work in some sort of service industry at some point in their life, because it teaches us a lot about ourselves and about other people. Like my daughter came home from Sunday school before Easter, just before Easter, when she was a lot younger than she is now. And I asked her what they did in Sunday school, and she said that they did feet washing. And I said, oh, what did you learn from that? And she said, humiliation. And I thought, yeah, we should all work in the service industry. Now, one of the reasons that job was so beautiful is, let me just describe a typical day. I would go in and I would put on my apron first thing. Now, I always wore the same apron. And then the first thing I would do is I would take the big bucket of heavy chemicals and I would go out to the parking lot and I would pour those chemicals on the oil and antifreeze stains that were on the asphalt. Then I would take a hose and I would wash those stains and those chemicals into the creek where they would never be seen again. And then I would go inside and I would go to we had this huge deep fryer. And underneath of it all, there was this drawer that you could pull out, sort of like the drawer on the bottom of your oven, except this is where all of the little things that fell off the chicken as they were frying would sift through this screen of some of the oil. All of that would go down and finally catch in this big repository. And I would pull out that drawer. We'd let it go like a week. And it was just full of this barely liquid brown sludge. And I would take a saucepan and I would scoop up one solid saucepan of that and put that on the prep table, because that's what we made the gravy out of. And then I would take the rest and I would take it out. Beside the dumpster, there were two big blue 55-gallon drums. And I would pour that sludge into those drums. And then when that got rancid, about once every month maybe, a truck from Revlon would come and pick up that sludge. And from that, they made lipstick and mascara. So if you've ever been applying your mascara and suddenly thought to yourself, oh, I'd really like some fried chicken, now you know why. And then I would go inside and I would make the chicken. And the way you made the chicken is there was sort of a sunken bowl in the prep table, which was full of flour and the 11 secret ingredients. And I would put all of that together, take the chicken, dump a big bucket of chicken into that prep flour, and then you would take the chicken, fold it into the flour 21 times, and you had to press it against your abdomen to force the flour into the chicken. Now, I always wore the same apron. So my apron was wet from cleaning the parking lot, and the flour would get on that. So by about Thursday, because I always wore the same apron, my apron would have about a 4-inch thick, just solid flour coating. And I'd have to kind of kick it out in front of me and then take a couple of quick steps before it came swinging back. And this restaurant, this was in the days where some marketing genius had got the idea that what you wanted most when you went into a fast food restaurant was to be able to see clear to the back. When you went to order your food, you could look all the way back through the kitchen. Why that was a good idea, I don't know. When I go to a fast food restaurant, I do not want to see the apathetic, greasy-haired, pimply-faced teenager who's back there preparing my food. But you'd come in, and you could see right past the cashier, and the cashiers were women. This was probably sexist, but the cashiers were women, and the people in the back were the guys. You could see straight back, all the way back. The only place you couldn't see was off to one side. There was a recessed area where there was a sink where we did the dishes, and then there was the oven that we cooked the biscuits in. Now, the biscuits, we cooked at 375 degrees. There was a digital thermometer on the oven that said 375. At one time, one of the women from up front ventured to the back of the store, and she looked at that digital thermometer that said 375, and she said, "There's something wrong with that clock." And I said, "Oh, no, it's military time. It's 15 after 4. And she said, okay. So also back there was the coleslaw maker, but I'm not even going into that. And then there was the sink where we did the dishes. And just above the sink, there was a little metal shelf. Now, we didn't just serve chicken at the Kentucky Fried Chicken. We had a full menu. We also served cod. And the way we did the cod was I came in the morning, I'd go back to the deep freeze, and I'd get out a cardboard box about the size of a building brick. And I would open that up and I would slide out the frozen cod, again, about the size of a brick, just the way it comes from the ocean. And that was just one solid block of cod. And I would put that up on a little shelf above the sink because that was sanitary, because sometimes soap got up there. And we would wait for that to thaw. And whenever somebody wanted cod, I would go back, take a lump of cod, put it on the prep table, take a fillet knife, cut off a fillet, pat that in flour, push it against my abdomen, and put it in the deep fryer. Now, our boss was a little guy named Jim or Joe. I forget which, but I know that at some point I changed it to protect his identity. But because I can't remember whether it was Jim or Joe, I now call him Jim Joe. That way no one will know who he was. And he was bitter, I think. He was probably 35 years old. And I don't think that his dream was to be the manager of a Kentucky Fried Chicken. And every now and again, he would go off to these seminars. And then he would come back. But he never told us anything that we learned at these seminars, except one time he came back. He was so excited. He said we were no longer allowed to use the word rag. He said if a customer heard us say rag, they would be so disgusted that they would never again venture into a Kentucky Fried franchise anywhere in the world. Instead of saying rag, we were supposed to say dish towel. And so anytime we did say rag, Jim Joe would shout, no matter where he was in the restaurant, he would shout, "Don't say rag, say dish towel." So we would play this fun little game. I would be like over by the sink, and this guy named Brian who worked there would be way over by the deep fryer. And Jim Joe would be in the front of the restaurant, past the counter, all the way at the front of the restaurant, talking to a customer. And I would yell to Brian, "Hey, Brian, throw me a rag." And then Jim Joe would yell from the front of the restaurant, "Don't say rag, say dish towel." Oh, it was great fun. And so one day, it was Mother's Day, and the place was packed, right? Because, you want to take your mom somewhere nice on Mother's Day. And we were having a rush on cod, and we'd run out of the thawed cod. So I went back to the deep freezer, got a frozen block of cod, put that on the prep table, took the fillet knife, and I was cutting the cod. Of course, the knife was dull, and the knife slipped, and it hit my pinky, and it just cut the skin right down my first digit, and the skin just kind of flapped over, so it was just hanging there like that. And so I took this finger. I didn't panic. I'm an Eagle Scout. I knew what to do. I folded the flap of skin back up, held it above my heart, and squeezed it tight. And there was blood coming down both my elbows. I jumped out from the hidden kitchen sink area into the corridor where everybody and their mother could see me, blood running down my elbows. And I was screaming, "Throw me a rag, throw me a rag." And Jim Joe turned and looked at me, assessed the situation, and said, "Don't say rag, say dish towel." And he made me go and stand in the deep freeze with my hand above my head until the bleeding quit. Now, the other great thing about working at that restaurant, maybe the greatest thing about working at Kentucky Fried Chicken, I don't know if you're aware of this, but the grease that we deep fry the chicken in does not arrive at the store in liquid form. It comes in these big 80-pound blocks of lard. And so what would happen when we needed new grease, we go back in the storeroom, get one of these big cardboard boxes, lay that on the prep table, pull the cardboard all the way off. And then inside that, wrapped in blue cellophane, was this big block of lard. And then we would pull the cellophane off, thus revealing just this beautiful, smooth alabaster cube of lard. And we would cut that into slices and then put those in the deep fryer, and they would melt. But sometimes you'd get the lard open and then you'd get busy and it was just sitting there on the table. And so you'd have to do other things. And if you bumped the table, the lard would just kind of go like that. It was beautiful. And then if it was just sitting there, I think you'll understand this, especially men. If there is just something sitting on a table and guys have to walk by it, eventually one of them is going to punch it. And so we would have this lard punching contest. And so to see who could hit the lard the hardest, it's just the way of my people. And we were back there one time having this contest. It was me and my buddy Brian, and then Ken, who was this big guy that worked there, and Jim Joe. And I punched the lard. My manhood wasn't really wrapped up in this, but I punched the lard, put about half my fist in, and then Brian punched the lard, probably went up to his wrist, and Ken barely even tried, punched the lard, went up above his wrist. And now it was Jim Joe's chance, little Jim Joe. He was going to be the biggest man in there. And he took this huge swing, and he hit the lard, and his arm went in and in and in. And then it stopped abruptly, and we heard crack, crack. He pulled his arm out. He had broken both bones in his arm. And he held his arm against his chest, and he looked at us, and he said, "I win." And then he drove himself to the doctor because he was management, and they could go to the doctor. So I said, and then after that, don't punch the lard, or punching the lard, became an expression of self-destructive behavior at the Kentucky Fried Chicken. Like you might say, Brian, when you wrecked your girlfriend's dad's car and you had that other girl with you, you really punched the lard. So I said to these kids at this graduation, because remember, this is my commencement speech. I said, as you go out into the world, I want you to remember several things. First, as my buddy Skeeter says, you can get by in this life if you're stupid or lazy, but not both. And I'm not lazy. Second, you got to move out of the house, which the kids didn't like, but the 1,200 people around them were like, yay. And then I said, you got a couple of decisions in front of you. You can go off to college, or you can not go off to college. I said both of those options have their bonuses and their cons. I said if you go to college, maybe you'll have more opportunities in the world, but then there'll be more people vying for those opportunities. And also, there's more responsibility at college because somebody is paying, unlike high school, somebody is paying for you to get good grades in college. I said, so there's both options. You can stay in town, you can leave town. If you leave, again, more opportunities, more people vying for those opportunities. If you stay, because it's a depressed economy, you're going to have to make your own job. You're going to have to be a mechanic or a lumberjack or a beautician or a baker or, heaven forbid, an artist. And I said, there's pros and cons to both of those. And I said, never make fun of anybody that has a job. We have a tendency in our culture in our society to make fun of people in the service industry. I said, never make fun of anyone who has a job, because people that have those jobs, they're not the most glamorous jobs in the world. But the people who hold those jobs want to work badly enough that they are willing to take those jobs. And let me just say, at this moment right now, during the coronavirus, we are so appreciative of the nurses and the doctors and the firefighters and the police and the people at Walmart, all of the people that are out there still working, still doing a job. But nobody ever mentions the garbage men and women. My garbage men and women, they're coming in the morning. They're out there. This can't be the greatest job in the world, but they're still doing it. So never make fun of anybody that has a job. Now, that said, I will say that if I were the manager of a Subway, the restaurant, when you boil down, you're doing an interview to see if you want to hire somebody, you're finally just asking yourself, do I think this person can make a sandwich? But anyway, never make fun of people who want a job. And then I said, above all, don't punch the lard. And there was sort of polite applause. And I went back and I sat down in my seat. And finally, it was time to pass out the diplomas. And the children stood up and they lined up alphabetically. This was maybe the one thing that they had learned in 12 years of American public school. And they started to call out the names, and the kids had to come up the stairs, stand at the edge of the stairs, wait for their name to be called. Then they would cross the stage, shake the hands of the 17 dignitaries, get their diploma, and go off into the world. And this was going on, and the kids were coming by, and they were coming by, and they weren't saying to me, "You changed my life. What a beautiful speech. I'll never be the same person again. I'm now going to go out and, rule the world." Nobody said anything like that to me. And you know what? I don't mind speaking in front of audiences. There are weeks where I probably speak to 10,000 people, and I love it. I thrive on it. But this was bugging me because none of these kids were saying anything good to me, and I was starting to feel lower and lower. Plus, I had to shake the hand of 300 17 and 18-year-olds, and I didn't want to shake the hand of 300 17 and 18-year-olds because I knew exactly where those hands had been. I thought, this is like a Robin Cook novel, right? Like commencement. But anyway, kids are coming by. They're coming by. And I'm saying, and they're saying, and no, I'm saying to them, like, great job, congratulations. And then the next kid, I'd be like, congratulations, great job, because I'm a wordsmith and I can turn it like that. And finally, I look over at the edge of the stage, feeling as low as I could feel because I'm not even sure they recognized me as the commencement speaker. Feeling terrible about this. I have not accomplished my goal. I look over, and standing at the top of the stairs on the edge of the stage is a kid. And clearly his physical maturity has far surpassed his mental and like coordination maturity. He's just sort of swaying on the edge of the stage. He's about 6'8", probably weighs 110 pounds. If he turned sideways, he'd look like a 1x12. And when he ordered his gown, I bet it fit. But between ordering his gown and today, he's grown 11 and a half feet. So the gown only comes to here on his arms, and it just goes down to just above his knees. And I think he was wearing underwear. I don't know. But I know that from the bottom of his gown to the top of his untied combat boots, there was just raw, white, hairless leg. And here's this kid just kind of swaying on the edge of the stage. And they announce his name, Keith Plum. And I can see his family out there. You can just tell by the looks on their face that he's the first person in their entire family to ever graduate from anything that wasn't court ordered. And he's just kind of swaying back and forth. And I'm just thinking to myself, because I was awkward like this when I was a kid too. I was thinking, Keith, I just want you to make it across the stage. That's all. If you can get to the dignitaries, we can prop you up. We can take your hands and pass you one from the other. I don't want you to suffer any embarrassment. I know you're worried about it. Keith, just get to us and we will get you across. So they call his name, Keith Plum, and he starts to step off the edge of the stair onto the stage, and he's swaying in the breeze, and the whole place goes quiet. You can tell that there's just a disaster about to happen. And then from way in the back of the kids, from back in the WXYZs, those poor kids that are always last when we line up, except sometimes there's one kind-hearted teacher who's like, let's line up in reverse alphabetical order so the Z's are first, because as Jesus said, the first shall be last. You know what? That's great for them, but my last name is Lepp, and we in the LKMN group, we never get to be first. Nobody ever says let the middle line up first. But anyway, they say Keith Plum, and he starts to take his step, and from back in the Z's, I hear some genius young person yell out, "Hey, plum nuts, don't punch the Lord." And I thought, I did it. Thank you very much, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Excellent. Oh, that was such a great story. I'm going to remember punching the Lord now. I'm going to make that part of my vocabulary. Oh my God, there were so many great things in that, Bill. Thank you so much. That's brilliant. And I must admit, not that I go anywhere, but I'm certainly not going back to Kentucky Fried Chicken. And in a minute, we're going to bring back both Bill and Brandon to say goodbye. But just before that, I want to tell you what's happening next Sunday. We've got another Sunday Night Stories special, and we've got Margot Lightman. Margot Lightman founded the storytelling program at the Upright Citizens Brigade and is a 5-time winner of the Moth and the first person ever to hold the honour of having a perfect 10 score at a Moth Grand Slam. Well, that's it for our show. Again, as we said, if you'd like to donate to one of our causes, Feeding America, the World Health Organization, or the National Storytelling Network, please do. Anything you can give would be lovely. Just doesn't have to be huge, but just something. The links are in the chat and they'll be on our Facebook page. And if you could just take a moment just to press that little red subscribe button to our YouTube channel, we'd be very grateful. And obviously visit the 6 Feet Apart Productions Facebook page for all the information. So now I'd like to bring back both Brandon Spars and Bil Lepp to say thank you very much for your excellent stories. Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Brandon.
Thank you.
And I'd also like to thank my... Oh, bye, Bill. Thanks. I'd like to thank my son, Tom, for all the pretty stuff and my husband, Bug, for all the techie stuff. Otherwise, we wouldn't even be here. And then thank you very much for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you next week. Bye.
6 feet apart, 6 feet apart. It's the newest thing to do. Stay 6 feet apart, 6 feet apart. The distance between me and you. 6 feet apart, 6 feet apart. And when I say I'll keep you very close to my heart, it's purely metaphorical. These times are quite historical. So step aside, let's live our lives 6 feet apart.